I'm very honored to introduce our North Carolina Secretary of Treasury, Dale Fowell. He's here to kind of give us an update on what's going on at the state and with funding and how COVID is affecting us. And appreciate, Mr. Secretary, you spending some time with us this morning.
Well, thank you. Should I proceed?
It's all yours.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Madam President, I appreciate the opportunity to come before you today and sort of give you a state of the state address about where we are financially in North Carolina. And I hope that you'll develop some questions over the next few minutes that I can answer. Before proceeding, I just want to tell you that it's possible that I could get emotional during my remarks. There are things that, as you know, that we're all dealing with in life that are worth getting emotional over. I'll be getting highly mathematical, but not political. And it's also important for you to know that I'm a pretty unlikely person to ever have become the state treasurer, but I'm standing on the shoulders of a lot of folks who have helped me along the way. And one of those folks is a Johnston County resident, J.H. Langdon, and who's been a very important person to me in my Raleigh life since 2005. So I just want to pay honor and respects to J.H. and his wife and tell all of you how important he, as a Johnston County representative, was to me as a Forsyth County representative in the General Assembly several years ago. So with that, Mike and Kelly and others, I'll tell you that several months ago, we applied for and received about $4 billion of COVID CARE Act money. As you can imagine, in good Johnston County tradition, as soon as that money hit the treasurer's office, we put it into interest-bearing accounts. But very soon thereafter, $471 million of that was earmarked and swept out for the benefit of 3 counties and 1 city. Those 3 counties are Wake, Guilford, and Mecklenburg, and that 1 city is Charlotte. I'm often asked, especially with people in the Triangle, why didn't Raleigh get any of that money? And the answer is not political, it's mathematical. Congress set a standard because of where they thought we were as far as hotspots in this virus, set a standard of populations in excess of 500,000 residents. And even though there's a lot of people in the city limits of Raleigh, there aren't 500,000 inside the city limits of Raleigh. And that's why the 3 counties and the 1 city got that special appropriation and Raleigh didn't. A few weeks ago, bipartisan and bicameral, both House and Senate in the North Carolina General Assembly, they passed a COVID bill that spent $1.5 billion of that money. So that leaves a couple of billion still remaining, and I'll be glad to address why that is. And during that process, Johnston County got some of that appropriation, as well as the cities through Johnston County will get some of that appropriation, not the $471 million, but the amount of money that the North Carolina General Assembly appropriated. So on top of that, and I'm going to start stacking these because it's becoming important as you read about the budget shortfalls that the state is facing, that you understand that these billions are going to start adding up. So on top of what's still here from the COVID CARE Act money, we have nearly $2 billion of budget surplus from the last budget year that ended on June 30th. We have $1 billion of rainy day fund. And I don't know what it's been like in Johnston County, but in Winston-Salem, it's rained about 10 inches just in the last few weeks. So that's a rainy day fund. And I think very specific to the chamber that you are a member of, for you to know that we have about close to $3 billion in the unemployment trust fund, not the highway trust fund. It's almost eviscerated, but the unemployment trust fund. The reason that should really matter to you as a chamber is this. 7 years ago, when I was in charge of that agency, some of you may recall, we did not have a surplus. We had a deficit of $2.6 billion. Why should you care about an unemployment trust fund deficit? The reason you should care is that hopefully you're not waking up thinking about AAA bond ratings and assumed rates of returns, or even something like FUTA and SUTA, which is federal unemployment and state unemployment taxes. But the U.S. Department of Labor comes in to the unemployment agencies of all the 50 states once a year, and they take a Polaroid once a year. And if that account is negative, all the employers in your community and across North Carolina, all the employers get assessed a FUTA surcharge. So that is an increased surcharge on payroll. Now, in 2013, what that meant was that surcharge had been charged for a long period of time. We had a surplus leading into 9/11. We had the recession after 9/11, and then we went into a deficit. So those surcharges were charged to all the businesses across North Carolina. We got out of that deficit spending just by a year, and then we ended up with another the great financial recession starting in 2008. So it should be good news for you to know that unlike then, we have nearly $3 billion of unemployment trust fund surplus. And what that means is that it's highly unlikely, even with the massive amount of pain and unemployment that we're facing in our state right now, it's highly unlikely that that account will go in a negative territory. Why should that matter to you? Because if you're competing against another state, and I won't name names, but one that borders us, they're going to burn through all their unemployment trust fund money. They're going to have to go into deficit spending. Those surcharges are going to come onto the payroll. So as a chamber, if you're talking to people who are thinking about retaining or expanding or relocating their business to Johnston County, you need to talk about the safety and the solvency of our unemployment trust fund. And because no company wants to come here and then pay for the trust fund deficit of things they didn't have anything to do with creating. So it's a it's a nuanced point, but I can tell you that unlike the big leaders that you might be negotiating with from the chamber standpoint, there's somebody somewhere in that company that's got a real sharp pencil who understands the cost of actually doing business and how these food and surcharges can make it uncompetitive for them to come here. So that's great news. The pension plan. Why would I talk about the pension plan to a chamber of commerce? And the reason is that nearly 1 million public servants who teach, protect, or otherwise serve are connected with this pension plan. And in addition to many people on this Zoom call and people who are related to people on this Zoom call. The pension plan crossed $108 billion yesterday, first time in state history it's ever been at that level, and it's several $billion above what it was valued at on Valentine's Day of this year, which is considered the high water mark, even after paying out benefits. This pension plan pays out about $540 million every 30 days in benefits. That's over $6.5 billion a year. And Moody's, which a rating agency to me is like a credit score to you or a sanitation grade to a restaurant. Moody's designated this pension plan as being #1 in the country in terms of its ability to continue its fundedness during an economic downturn. And that was 10 months ago, before anybody ever heard of COVID and the economic volatility that's been created. So very pleased to report that, and I'm standing on the shoulders of the people who work in the investment management division and really previous state treasurers who have always conservatively managed this pension plan, never professed to have a crystal ball, and never gambled with the pension assets of those who taught, protected, and otherwise served. So why is that important if you're not connected with this pension plan in any way, shape, or form? Because it's funded not only by those that teach, protect, and serve and the employers they work for, but it's funded by taxpayers like them and like you. And you know, the 3 biggest expenses of Johnston County are the amount of money they send me to the pension plan, which is about 10% of payroll, the amount of money they spend on healthcare, pharmaceutical, and then principal and interest on their debt. So that's why all this stuff sort of matters, because the more money that they have to send into the treasurer's office for the pension plan, that's less money that they have to allocate toward things that your chamber really cares about: public education, public safety, public works, and public roads. That's how all this sort of connects. So with that, I just want to talk about my frustration. My frustration is that As Congress appropriated this money, it had strings attached. Those strings stay attached when they get to Raleigh, stay attached when some of the money ends up in Johnston County, and the municipalities within Johnston County. And one of the strings, for example, is that it had to be used for COVID-related activities. What in this world is not COVID-related activities these days, starting with the fact that I had to bring my own bacon to your meeting this morning. I know that you normally meet and probably have bacon or something that's really delectable to eat, but everything is COVID-related. And the fact is that as people have been locked down, they can't move. And when you can't move, you can't consume. And when you can't consume, you're not generating the income, the gas, the sales, and the occupancy taxes necessary to fund those things that you care about: public education, public safety, public works, and public roads. So that's why all this is important. And I would love, whatever they're attempting to do with another stimulus bill, that they fix the one they've already passed. Remove those strings so that the county of Johnston, the state of North Carolina, and your municipalities can use this money to backfill their budget shortfalls. The second frustration, we're pleased that they had this earmark for Wake, Guilford, and Mecklenburg County and Charlotte, but the fact is we don't have 3 counties, we have 100. We don't have 1 city, we have 540 cities. And to give you an example of in context, Alamance County got $6 million, Guilford got $93 million, Forsyth, right next to it, got 12. So 6, 93, and 12. Alamance, Guilford, and Forsyth. And my point of telling you that there needs to be a truing up of what's that acknowledges 100 counties and 540 cities. The General Assembly is attempted to do that, but we need to have these strings removed so that these counties can use this to fulfill their budget shortfalls. My fear is for rural North Carolina, and you have some areas of Johnston County that are rural and some that aren't, but especially between where you're sitting and the Atlantic Ocean. I'm a Quaker. The blood that's running through me is Quaker, but I attend a Methodist church, and those of you who are Methodists know that every year they have a word. 2 or 3 years ago, I think the word was context. So put everything in context. So let me give you an example. If you were to drive from Johnston County to Nags Head today, you would go through Terrell County. The county seat is Columbia, North Carolina. There's only 1 high school in that county. I was the keynote speaker this year at that high school drive-through commencement, 38 graduates. What I haven't told you is that Terrell County's total population is about equal to the student faculty population at Myers Park High School in Charlotte. What I haven't told you is that 50% of the land in Terrell County is not taxable from a property tax standpoint. And lastly, what I haven't told you is that Terrell County has suffered a 28% decline in their sales tax revenue. So when 50% of your property doesn't pay taxes, you have the population of a large high school, and you've had a 25% decline in sales tax revenue, you can see why my fear this morning is for rural North Carolina as they try to make up these tremendous shortfalls that they've faced because of as all the attention's been spent on flattening the healthcare curve. And I was hospitalized in intensive care for nearly 6 days toward the end of March with COVID-19. So I've seen it in living color, and I appreciate the focus on the sick, but at the same time, we must find that balance as we try to get folks back to work so that we don't punish the healthy. So with that, I'd be glad to take any questions that anybody might have on any subject. I will tell you that next week we have our State and Local Government Commission. We have been having a lot of conversations with people from Johnston County, both at the county level, with your new jail, with the city of Smithfield regarding some water and sewer upgrades, Clayton, who's trying to meet the water needs of 2 big water users, Norquist and Griffins. So we always appreciate the opportunity to work with the local leadership in Johnston County. And also, before I go to questions, I want to brag. For example, on Smithfield, the statewide average of how much money these cities in North Carolina have in reserve is 25%. The city of Smithfield does not have 1 times, 2 times, or 3 times. They have 4 times the statewide average. Nearly 100% of 1 year's entire budget at the city of Smithfield is in reserve. Now, as smart as the folks are in Smithfield, I don't think anybody could have predicted COVID-19. But the folks in Smithfield have understood, and the other cities in Johnston County, that they've always had to watch the pennies and the paper clips as they balance what the needs of their communities are versus the enormous growth that's gone on in Johnston County. And Johnston County has nearly 30% in reserves to meet their budget shortfalls. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions that anybody might have on any subject.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for your comments, and I truly appreciate all that you said. We've been very proactive in watching that trust fund for unemployment at the state level, and we've been involved in that. And I'm glad to hear that the fund is healthy, and we're always monitoring the use of that fund and how it impacts our businesses. So thank you for that, and thank you for all you're doing. I want to open up for questions for the Secretary. Anybody have any questions?
Melissa's shaking her head.
No.
Melissa, I tried to make this like a country music song. I'm going to burn you down and build you back up. I am going to build you back up before I get off the call, promise.
I have one question that I think everybody's a little worried about, and I've been on a number of statewide calls about, is really the transportation funding, transportation infrastructure funding, and specifically as we, not only COVID, but we're going through other changes. Right now the motor's fuel tax really drives that, and we're watching that pot of money kind of shrink. Where do you think we may land in the future in funding transportation?
Well, I will answer your question and attempt, may not be successful at this, in being kind and restrained in my remarks. It is a tragedy what has happened to the North Carolina Department of Transportation in the last 3 years. And that's a mathematical statement. Over the last 3 years, especially 2 years ago, as I was warning, the North Carolina Department of Transportation was literally writing checks it couldn't cash. It had overspent their budget by $2 billion. They had gone out and told road contractors and vendors, buy equipment, hire people, trees are going to grow to the sky. And the fact is, they knew the entire time that they were making promises they couldn't keep. And the road using public has suffered, taxpayers have suffered, but especially the road and bridge building and repair industry has greatly suffered because of what's happened to the North Carolina Department of Transportation over the last 2 years, especially. In addition to that, I never imagined when I became the keeper of the public purse in January of 2017 that I would be spending as much time on the DOT as I have. When I was sworn into office, the Highway Trust Fund, we've already talked about the Unemployment Trust Fund. The word trust is really important in that sentence. When I was sworn in, the Highway Trust Fund had nearly $1.4 billion in it, and it had not been touched in 15 years, basically, since Richard Moore was the treasurer after 9/11. And in less than 2 years, the Highway Trust Fund, in addition to $2 billion of overspending, has been eviscerated. And we have now less than $200 million sitting in the Highway Trust Fund. And, I went to UNCG, so I don't have a big dog in all these competitive sports rivalries that go on across North Carolina, even though UNCG has developed into a pretty good basketball program. But, Coach K once said that when they asked him about his courtside manner, and he said, listen, there's some things that happen right in front of your eyes that are worth getting upset about. and to have what would, if it was a standalone company, the North Carolina Department of Transportation, one of the biggest corporations in North Carolina, if it were a standalone company with revenues and expenses in excess of $5 billion a year, to have it overspend its budget by $2 billion and then wipe out its trust fund by over $1 billion is worth getting mad about. And the real tragedy here is that 7 years ago, the General Assembly, I think unanimously, passed a law to kind of put the North Carolina Department of Transportation in a mode, so to speak, where it could be sustainable and solvent for the next, because they stopped the transfer of money out of the Highway Trust Fund so that the DOT could be solvent and sustainable for the future. But this is where we are. I started talking about this, Mike, over 2 years ago. The state auditor now has come in and verified, so we're sort of the bookends. I said it here, and she said it in the last 2 months, that the DOT is overspent by hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And now we have just the latest saga that while all this was going on, they overpaid people $40 million by, is the words of the audit, illegal pay raises relative to the laws of North Carolina. And it's not just the $40 million of illegal pay raises. We did an actuarial study, and that $40 million in pay raises generated $179 million negative impact on the state pension plan. Who pays for that? Well, ultimately, everybody else, all the other people in the plan who teach, protect, and otherwise serve are going to have to pick up a piece of this decision that was made. So this is what I've asked for starting last October, Mike, and I'll close down my question. I asked the governor to replace the Secretary of Transportation. He's gone. The COO is now gone. I've asked for another person to be gone because they just don't know where the money is and who they owe, and that's really important. But the second thing I asked for is for that financial operations of DOT to be transferred to another department, and I want to underscore this, that also reports to the governor. The DOT reports to the governor, and the Office of State Management and Budget reports to the governor. Transfer the financial operations from DOT to OSBM. Let them control the financial spigot, since that's what they specialize in. That's why they call themselves the Office of State Management Budget. Let them control the financial spigot and let DOT focus on building and repairing roads and bridges. I believe that that's the only way that we're going to get out of this situation. Now, in terms of revenues, every time that you hear anything about the Department of Transportation, they talk about acts of God. The DOT being run into the ditch is not an act of God. That's a small part of it. These are acts of man. The MAP Act that's constantly mentioned is something that the DOT requested 22 years ago. They requested this, the MAP Act. The cost overruns and the mismanagement I've already spoke about, and the state auditor has spoke about extensively in her audit. These are just some of the things that are not acts of God, but actually acts of man. And the people of this state, especially fast-growing areas like Johnston County, deserve better. And I hope they'll get it.
All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate those comments, because transportation infrastructure for Johnston County is one of our top priorities for sure. Before we let the secretary go, any other questions for the secretary? And we really appreciate you spending time with us today. All right. Doesn't look like we have anything. Thank you so much for being here. Well, appreciate Mike, your service and work.
Mike, I promised Melissa I'd build her back up. So number one, always wear your mask, and I carry mine everywhere I go. But secondly, I know that the chamber does a lot of outreach, and you can find out more information about everything we've talked about at nctreasurer.com. We manage in total about $200 billion. That's 8 times the size of the state budget. But in addition to that, we have a division called NC Cash. Now, there are lawyers on this call, and they would admonish me to use the official term. It's called the Escheats Fund, but I used to stutter, and I'm advised not to use that word too often in a sentence because it could come out wrong. But the reason I'm bringing it up to your chamber is that there's $750 million sitting at NC Cash. I was speaking, Madam President, President Kelly. I was speaking with Josh Bass at the Currituck Chamber of Commerce. They had 2 entries at nccash.com. We gave $600,000, John, last year to a beneficiary of a life insurance policy, and no one had ever told the person that she was a beneficiary of a life insurance policy. So I would just suggest that all of you as citizens, Monica and all of you, go to nccash.com, punch in your name, your maiden name, your kids' names, your parents' names. If you have an unusual name like Falwell, you don't have to put in a city because we've been here for 150 years and in the LA area. Now, LA is not Los Angeles, that's lower Archdale, below High Point. But there's not many Falwells. The most famous Falwell is actually the head of the School of Business at Campbell University for so long, my cousin. But go to nccash.com, see if the chamber has money there. And it looks like everybody's in pretty good shape, but in the event that you happen to be missing any of these 4 items, you might also find them at nccash.com. Baby teeth, silver teeth, gold teeth, and false teeth. And the reason is, and you bankers know exactly where I'm ending up here, anytime that somebody doesn't pay the rent on a lockbox, it gets drilled out and the contents get escheated back to the treasurer's office. And you can imagine what people used to put in lockboxes, but to be a little more reverent for a moment, we were able to return some World War II medals recently to a family who'd been looking for 10 years. The dad had put the World War II medals in NC cash in a lockbox that got sent to the treasurer's office. So, and as you do your outreach, make sure, especially the nonprofits who are really struggling right now, charitable organizations. We have $1 million that belongs to churches, over 100 entries of hospices in food banks. We get $22,000 to the Eastern Food Bank of North Carolina, and which is based in the Triangle, that went to pay for 66,000 meals, thousands of dollars in 4-H of Lee County, thousands of dollars to the Hospice of DC. That's not District of Columbia, that's Davidson County. And so just go to nccash.com as a citizen, as a member of the chamber, and as you do your financial outreach, make sure that whoever you're giving money to doesn't also have money at nccash.com. And if they do, we'll help you secure that on their behalf.
Well, great. Thank you. Wonderful information. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate your time today.